All right, welcome everybody to Legal Tech Week for September 25th, 2020. This is Bob Ambrogi. I am I write the blog. Who am I? I write the blog. Who the heck am I? Where am I? I write the blog Law Sites, and I have the podcast Law Next. And there's Victoria just logging on.
Hey, sorry.
Well, that's okay. We're just starting. So since you just logged on, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name is Victoria Hutchins. I'm a reporter with Legal Tech News, where I cover cybersecurity and the intersection of law and technology.
All right. And Caroline, welcome back. It's been a while since we've seen you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been Erin. Hi, Caroline Hill, Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. Nice to be back.
Yeah. And Nikki?
My name is Nikki Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with My Case Practice Management Software. I write regular columns for the ABA Journal, Above the Law, the Daily Record, the My Case blog, and I also write for other outlets.
Molly.
I'm Molly McDonough. I am a former editor and publisher of the ABA Journal and working on content development and media strategy based in the Chicago area.
And last but never least, Joe.
Hey, Joe Patrice from Above the Law and the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast, and welcome to the outdoors on what might be the last decently warm day for a while. So,
yeah, it's a gorgeous day here in the Northeast. I don't know about where everybody else is, but it's just a perfect day. Of course, I'm sitting in my office, but well, we're very glad that Victoria showed up, because most of the stories we want to talk about this week are ones that she wrote. Not that we've been slacking off, but no. a lot of good stories from Victoria this week. But I thought we might want to just start with the kind of maybe the latest news, which is this acquisition of Rocket Matter, yet another practice management company getting acquired, and I thought it was interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that it also happened in a week earlier this week. This group ASG Legal Tech had acquired HeadNote, which is a payment processing platform, and these are both examples of private equity firms acquiring several different companies in a space that are related to each other but not overlapping. And then creating a new company around those different companies. And from what I understand, I mean, with ASG, they had acquired, Practice Panther and Maris Case and HeadNote and I forget the third one I'm blanking on right now. And they've created thank you. And they've created a company around that. And now with this latest acquisition, they're really creating a company focused more broadly on the professional services market, which I think is an interesting move. And from what I understand, I've only been able to talk to Larry Port briefly about this since this has all happened. But I mean, Larry says that the companies will remain distinct companies with their distinct management structures in place and pretty much operate business as usual. But of course, they hope to have efficiencies and other things that develop out of this. But, and I also just wonder whether this is somehow reflects, I don't know, a maturing of the practice management, because this all happens, 2 weeks after My Case got acquired. And Nikki's now broadcasting from her new mansion in outside Rochester, New York.
But, not true.
Well, the really nice bookcases, though.
Do you want me to chip in on that one,
sure.
Bob?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. So we've obviously seen this. There's HG, for example, is that there's companies that have been doing this, private equity companies, but not all that many. And what's interesting to me is this is a new. I think I described it as a new heads up, new kid on the block type thing, and so they, and not surprisingly, they are sweeping up billing. And they're trying to capitalize on this trend towards digitization, which obviously has been accelerated during COVID, as people realize that paper billing processes, which most law firms and professional services firms still use are just not sustainable given the continuing lockdown. So I think they're kind of realizing that obviously there's a definite opportunity, and also I liked the way that they described it as they want to create a vertical. They're trying to create a vertical market, which, and I had to just double check with myself what the content, So obviously they're trying to, and the way I think that I described it to myself was they're trying to create the Netflix of legal. So what they're trying to do is sort of bring billing, as you said, payments all under one roof, and just really help firms and professional. It's not just law firms, but professional service firms automate the whole lot, which obviously it should be. It's not rocket science. But yeah, it's interesting that there's a new private equity. To me, the interesting thing, apart from obviously the fact that Rocket Meta has been acquired, which is big news in itself, they've created this new company entirely. So it's Lightyear Capital has created this new company entirely. I think they're called ProSolve. And I think while I like what they are, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I think we know from history, from experience, that not all private equity driven initiatives are by necessity going to be successful. They need to really understand the context of the market in which they're operating, I just would be interested to see how they develop, and it's quite interesting. They're not just focusing on legal; it's professional services. They talked about engineering companies, and there was a lot going on.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on. Some of it made me feel a bit like, I don't know. It's great time, great. You can see it's very makes a lot of sense. But are they going to give great customer service? Are they going to understand the market in which they operate? I had a lot of questions.
Yeah, as do a lot of people, I think.
Yes, although Larry, I mean, you spoke to Larry. I emailed Larry. He obviously seems quite happy.
Right. Yeah.
But he's staying on. He told you he's staying on, right?
That's what he told me.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I have a question.
They always say that at the beginning, but
right, that's what I was going to say. They always say that in the beginning, and then then something happens where they get fed up, or So I was just curious if anybody has a pool.
I guess, but they might be locked in. I don't know, but because there are three companies, right? So there's Rocket Meta, and then two others that I didn't know.
TimeSolve. The other one I was not aware of. It was outside. The other one was sort of outside of legal, but it was.
Wasn't it accounting?
Accounting for accounting. Accounting was the vertical it was in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I remember when Mark Britton sold Avo and told everybody, I'm going to be here for the long haul, with the new owners, and what was it? 2 months later, he was out of there, I think. So.
Yeah.
And then there was Total Attorneys. Everyone remembers them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With that Bain Legal takeover, or Bain Capital.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know I heard from some people, somebody who's might even be in our audience today, or sometimes in our audience. I got an email last night saying, does this mean, they're just going to suck the life out of these companies and drain them for what they can and then get rid of them? And, I don't, that sometimes, I mean, I think that's more a kind of a VC model than a PE model. And I think it depends a lot on who the private equity firm is. And, I think generally they do want to make money and build businesses. So we'll see.
They seem to be trying to, I mean, who knows, but they seem to be trying to combine, make, fully automated, fully efficient, built-in billing solutions, so that they don't need to do any kind of paper. So they bring it all, take it, which I mean, if it seems, it's like a kind of no-brainer, isn't it? Really?
No, I think it is. I think the ASG legal tech people did a good job. Have a potential to do a good job with acquiring Headnote, because now they've got they can integrate a payments processor into all of their separate products, but still have the standalone product that they can offer on the market. It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, and that's similar to the Simple Citizen acquisition too. It's kind of leveraging that technology and that process for a larger firm approach instead of the business to consumer approach. I mean, direct to consumer approach that Simple Citizen started with. So I think that's interesting too.
Yeah. I haven't talked to them yet. Actually, I'm scheduled to talk to them next week, but. So I don't know that much about that deal yet.
But I think again, I think whoever was talking to you, Bob, was asking about stripping it. I mean, I think a lot of it will come. I think it's hard. You mustn't underestimate the consumer care side of things. Like these things need, people still need to feel, they can get good service. So I guess, I don't. And this is an unknown entity. It's a brand new company, so I guess we can't. It's not like it, but profits of. So I guess we can't. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
We should speak to the Rocket Matter customers, find out what they think.
Yeah. I mean, you like to think, I've known Larry pretty much since he started it way back. Him and Ariel, I don't know if anybody remembers Ariel, was his co-founder way back when, but, I feel like knowing him, I feel like he probably feels pretty confident about what these new owners are going to do with the company, because this is really, it's his baby, and he's cared a lot about it, and I think he's cared a lot about his customers over the years, and so we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Of Victoria, of all, you had so many good stories this week. Any that you particularly wanted to talk about, or you're muted?
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, guys. Whatever stories. I know we talked about in the emails earlier about like stories you guys would like to cover, and we can get to the Deloitte story I had was from last week, so it isn't really fresh, but whatever story that you guys want to talk about, I'm down here.
The naming one was kind of interesting, I thought, but.
Yeah, the naming article where I wrote about what does it take, how do legal tech companies decide to name their company a particular name? And that article really stemmed from, I've been writing about legal tech news since 2018, and some of the legal tech names, they're like nice verbs. Some of the names are like verbs, one-word verbs, and they don't really say, like elevate, reveal, those types of names, disco, you don't necessarily think of legal tech. And for me, kind of doing my research for when I was writing about those companies, when I would put those names into Google search, I would get a bunch of pages that weren't related to the legal tech companies. And usually I would just write legal or services, and then the website will pop up first. And I just kind of thought, for a legal tech company, why do they pick those names that can be associated with just a random word and aren't associated with legal? And kind of speaking, I spoke to Elevate, Liam Brown, CEO, about that. And he said he wanted kind of like that broad wording for his company, because for Elevate, it could mean like elevating legal services, and not just saying like we provide technology services, but also consulting, workflow, consultation, and of course they provide technology as well. So for him it worked, and he talked about earlier he founded Integron, and he said first it was just called IMS, and no one could remember that, and it would be on like page 30 of a Google research, and then he said, okay, we'll give it the name Integron, which hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, but he found a lot of people actually couldn't pronounce the name correctly. So he was like, okay, after that whole thing, he did think about like, I think that kind of motivated him to say like, hey, I want to look at a name that's a little bit more to the point. It maybe won't be associated with legal, but it's kind of like a word that makes you think like, okay, they're going to help me in my company. It's kind of like innovation. And when I spoke to legal innovators, the co-CEO, Brian Parker, he said that they specifically wanted legal in the title, because he said for the legal professional, when they want to know right away, are you friend or foe? And he just kind of he thought of a legal innovator that said like, hey, we're helping you. And he even revealed kind of like thought about putting the word disruptor in the company's name, but they thought that may turn off law firms or lawyers that may say, hey, are you trying to take work from me? Are you like the robots that are coming here to take my job away or anything? So it's kind of like that balancing act of, I need something that sticks out, but do I make it something that's legal specific, or do I keep it kind of vague? And it's kind of like you have to go through that. And I always wonder with like Google searches, and people just, when I spoke to a legal marketer, she just said, hey, legal purchases, they'll just put in whatever the name of the company is and then legal, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue. You just have to build up the branding.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, so I was just going to say I had a side conversation on LinkedIn about this with Chase Herzl from now LegalZoom, and I started thinking about all the company. One of his comments was that he thinks that the good naming convention is when you can identify the problem in your name. And I started thinking about the problem and solution and some of those good names like LegalZoom or FastCase, or where you kind of know what they do by their name somewhat, at least, or it fits their model. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But then there are a lot of companies that just I scratch my head. So I just don't. I have no idea what they do by their name or sometimes their landing page and company description.
But it drives me mad that the thing that you were saying, Victoria, about the generic name. I just cannot understand. If I was naming, and I feel like all startups ought to be aware of this, that if I was naming my company, I would make it so that it was easy, because so many names, like all of the names you described, so Elevate, Disco, etc., they're all just generic. And actually, until they develop, I know maybe you could put legal in, but there are so many times that I've gone to search for something and it's actually really difficult to find. And I think that, I haven't really thought so much, Molly, about. I suppose it should really do what the company does. I suppose the name should mean something. But for example, on last Friday, I interviewed Adrian Kamara from Athenian, which is spelled with a double N, and it's simple. That's a simple thing, which means that actually it's quite easy to discover, right? So, and I'm not sure what that doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but it's a name that you can find, right? So from a branding perspective, I feel like companies should have a name that is easy to find, that's quite unique.
Yeah, and I reached out to Cleo, but we weren't able to connect before my deadline. But like Cleo, like that name, I wanted to kind of know like what's the origin of it. I've never heard of a Cleo. Like I kind of thought of Cleon, Cleon from Star Trek, which I probably mispronounced, but kind of like that. But it's kind of like it's unique. Klingon, yeah. It's just kind of like
similar.
do you want to create something new and unique, or do you want to make sure that you have law in your name, which to me kind of seems like that might be the boring way, but that lets you know automatically, even for non-legal tech or law professionals, that they're geared towards the legal industry. But I can see like how you maybe want like more vague, but like verb types of names. It seems like, okay, we're doing something, we're progressive perhaps, but what do you actually do?
Challenge. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. Oh no, it just, the thing with the verbs is I think they're awesome branding names if you know what they are already. But if you're trying to discover something, it's almost impossible to find them. Like when I'm thinking of like great names in this space, I like case text. I know what it does. It does case text. It's right there in the title. So I really appreciate those sorts of names. Disco, actually, have always thought, while it's not great from an SEO perspective because there's other things called disco, but I get the logic of the name because it's like discovery. Oh, we dropped disc. Oh, like I mean, it's cute.
I never made that connection until you guys just said that. I never understood why it was disco.
It took me a little while. And I was like,
never mind, then maybe it isn't all that clever. If it took that long, it may not be that clever then.
I just found on Clio's support page, Clio gets its name from Clio, the Greek muse of history.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking about that because Clio has really tried to extend the brand beyond legal too. So I could see a name like that. Where in one of the ones I mentioned earlier, Simple Citizen was meant to be direct to consumer. And LegalZoom was direct to consumer. So the naming, I assume depends on your audience too. You want to have something that's more closely related to what you do if you're going directly to a general consumer audience.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that it's incredibly challenging to come up with any name that has legal or law or something in it that somebody isn't already using or hasn't already registered the domain name for or something these days. I mean, when I was starting my Law Next podcast, I wanted some name I wanted a catchy name, but that suggested, I don't know, innovate, like Legal Innovators. I don't know how they got that. That had to have been taken. I don't know. But Ben, my son who I work with, and I just like labored over names, and every name we came up with was taken or somebody had. And I forget how we landed on Law Next, but it turned out it was available, and I just went and bought it. And
well, it can be difficult with branding. I mean, there's a number of different issues. There's the choosing it when you're a small startup and you don't have a lot of time and energy to focus on that when you're trying to do all these other things, and especially when there's a crowded space. But then there's all these like post-choice issues, if you will. Like Rocket Lawyer and Rocket Matter rolled out at similar times, and there was always sort of some confusion in the marketplace because their names were so familiar, because they're both in legal, and it was neither of their faults, you know, it was just such similar names. And then there are other issues, like sometimes there's a company that sells sex toys that shares the name with a competitor that I won't share, but it's a newer company that's in the news all the time. You know, we get competitor, you know, we learn news updates like about competitors, you know what I mean? And there's constantly get like sex toys in my inbox. I'm like, I can't believe that. That's an unfortunate post-branding issue that they had no control over. But,
No.
or fortunate, depending on.
I have no polite observations about that at all.
but so sometimes there's just unfortunate things that happen too, like Rocket Matter, Rocket Lawyer, then someone else comes up with the company with a product unrelated to yours.
I did not briefly announce this morning that Rocket Lawyer had been bought. That definitely did not happen before I had a moment of absolute freaking horror.
Right? Even when you're in the space writing about it, sometimes there's confusion.
Honest to God, I've got a block. It's not the first time I've done it, and it is. I don't know why. I mean, we check. We do. I'm like, how did I put that? I put it in the title. For a few seconds, and then it got automatically tweeted out. I had to go and delete every tweet. I was just literally nearly throwing up. It was just the absolute because I wrote it really early this morning, like 5 or something ridiculous, when my brain was obviously not awake.
That was neither company's fault, right? Like I feel like it came out at similar times, and I don't know exactly when, but it's no one's fault, but it's just confusion.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate.
Well,
but.
Yeah. Joe, did you want to talk about? I know you have to. You might have to.
I didn't necessarily have anything to talk about. I wanted to talk about companies that sound like sex toys. So no, So that
could be like a whole series on Above the Law.
Yeah.
Can we collaborate on that article? All of us. Like, we'll all write a paragraph.
Law firms that sound like sex toys.
Well, that's. Yeah. I've already got like 3 in my head. But no, I really haven't done all that much tech work this week. We are maybe this will be your weekly update on how the bar exam is going. Not well. California has decided, but this actually has a legal tech connection, which is that they've decided to stop answering their helpline because too many things were coming in, so they just stopped answering. Which is the sort of customer service commitment that you get from an organization that has a complete monopoly on things.
But Joe, what are you hearing about redundancy? So because one of the things in a lot of my conversations about tech and money and all this kind of stuff, there's a lot of conversations in the background about the redundancies that are happening, and that's more your sort of field than. And I think that is going to become in this in the next few months a big thing, right? Like, I mean, it already is. So, but in terms of how people are spending their money on tech or not, or what, I don't know. Like, it's just the whole thing dealing with work was coming up in my conversations about support stuff and workflow and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're not. Unfortunately, we're not quite at a point where people are going to have to face those concerns because they're still working remotely. But when people start coming home, it's gonna be a thing, because you're now going to live in a world where you shake out how much. Right now, everyone's kind of operating in a world where both exist. We're all going to be remote, but we assume you all come back. And then when this ends, that's not going to be how most of these firms operate. And then what happens? Then they're going to have to face some hard questions about, do we really need this? Do we really need that? And it's going to be a long tail, I think, because people are locked into their leases and stuff. But I mean, any law firm that's coming up on their lease, I got to assume right now they're considering downsizing significantly, right? Because there's not really a good reason to have a full, especially if you're in New York. There's no there's no excuse for New York, Manhattan rentals when you don't need everyone to come in every day.
So we're just going into lockdown part 2. So it's not being called that. It's been called we're avoiding lockdown, but depending on which day you listen to and how tall you are and what you had for breakfast, like it's all like all these variations. But and I'm hearing that, you know, that the law firms in the UK are they were slowly bringing people back into the office, and obviously using, you know, mine tech to sort of monitor who's coming, and now that's a lot of them are just reversing that. So Canary Wharf is starting to empty out. There are firms that, what's really interesting is that there are firms that are now saying that they're kind of letting a few people, they're kind of, there's different ways of interpreting, they're letting a few people stay in the office because of mental health reasons. That the biggest, what's really interesting is that with the lockdown part 1, tech was the biggest thing, and now with the lockdown part 2, mental health is coming up time and time again, as well as productivity, like how to, you know, make sure that your staff are productive and also look after them. So, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what impact it has in terms of redundancies in the next few months, I think.
Well, and I'm also hearing from, you know, from that, on that point, Caroline, the number of parents who are just desperate to get back into the office to get work done while their kids are home doing virtual school. But then, you know, how do you do the childcare? All of that comes up, but you know, at least being able to access an office and not have your 3-year-old climbing all over you while you're.
Exactly. And actually, do you know what? Now they've got their systems in place. You know, I was speaking to the CIO of a UK firm yesterday, and they've got their approvals processes in place. They've got their 2-meter distancing. They've got their desk wash system. You know, they can actually allow people to continue to. It's not like this is new, right? And they can allow, on, you know, within reason, people to continue if they need to, if they've got something that they're working on, or they just need to have a break. They can just allow them, you know. But but then I am hearing of more sort of dramatic where one of the big international firms, I think, is just in the UK. They've just closed their offices again. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes down. Oh, Bob, I think you might be on mute. Oh.
All right, I can't hear Bob. But
oh God, I
couldn't do this without our fearless leader.
I couldn't hear anyone for a minute. I was like, my something's died this end, right? Oh.
Nope, he's still no
Yeah,
Bob.
no.
Strange.
Welcome to a legal talk show where we can't get our tech to work.
Anyway, over to Victoria. Victoria will now talk about one of the many stories, one of which is ALSPs.
ALSPs, which was actually a story pitched by Zach Warren, the editor-in-chief in Legal Tech News, who is like a panelist on this podcast, but he wasn't able to make it for this early show. But this article was pretty much looking into, does the size of an ALSP and really just like them staff that they have available, is headcount very important for a client when they're making the decision of working with an ALSP? And of course, when it comes to like the more the large volume, like document review, e-discovery matters, that is something where you do need a lot of like bodies to work on. But when I spoke to Ed Son, who works at Factor, and I believe he was at EY beforehand, he said that headcount really fluctuates in ALSPs, and that really it isn't all ALSPs. They have permanent, full-time, and flex workers, but it's really an ALSP's ability to have access to those pools of like lawyers and legal professionals for matters that really is important for clients, and if they're going to work with them, to make sure that that ALSP has the resources. Nikki, I think you're on mute. Anything else?
Bob was wondering.
So that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. So I'm afraid Victoria, I haven't got that article, but were you looking at, so you're looking at it from the contract review and the discovery perspective, so from the wider perspective?
Yeah, and we tried to, definitely was speaking with Factor, which they provide not just document contract review, they also provide like contract negotiation and workflow concept as well, which that doesn't necessarily, I don't think, require a lot of
testing.
Oh,
you're on.
I had to switch my audio input here. Can you hear me?
You're back. You're
Yeah,
back. Yeah, you're good.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's the verdict? So sorry, I was a bit distracted by the whole audio excitement. So and what was the what was the verdict? So the verdict was that they are swung by the styles of the.
It's the access to the lawyers and legal professionals, not necessarily that you have them on staff and they're on permanent payroll. That's not necessarily, but it's just having access to, and especially for large international clients, if you have access to those lawyers and legal professionals in different parts of the world, when you have like that requirements that data can't leave certain countries or certain jurisdictions, or is in foreign languages, that you have access, but not necessarily that you have them on staff at all time.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
So Adriana's on, Linares is on here, and she had a guest recently on her new solo podcast that from one of the co-founders of Law Clerk, and their company has just exploded in growth with number of matters, and they run a freelance attorney business basically. And that's it, and I thought it was interesting because it was exactly the type of thing that is appealing to smaller firms. But that on-demand lawyering, being able to have the ability without having to cover the overhead and hire full-time. And they're apparently even adding fractional associates to the mix. So you can have, a quarter of an associate.
What's I think it's a bit of a tangent, but what's really interesting is so often with the review side of things, if you're talking about e-discovery review, so that was part of the can get mad. So was that with so obviously previously there was a physicality to it, so there was a need for you sort of have a whole bunch of people going into a room to do a review, or within e-discovery, similar thing. But now, because everything's they're able to facilitate more remote e-discovery or more remote due diligence, and actually COVID has accelerated that. So actually, there's no need for either to be on staff or B, them to be in the actual location, which I think has been quite sort of, I think it's been quite big progress in terms of both quality and also opening up for people, just you don't have to be in the city or whatever. I don't know. I thought that was, perhaps it's a bit of a tangent, but I thought it's been quite interesting in terms of COVID has meant that it's opened it up to a wider pool of people.
Yeah, and definitely, like technology has really allowed, in Ed, he mentioned in the article, early 2010s, you maybe had armies of lawyers working on very large e-discovery matters, but now e-discovery providers and the ALSPs, they're using predictive coding and machine learning. So at least for that first pass review, you don't need all those lawyers or document reviewers to go in and to look at the documents. So it's kind of, I would assume, making it a little bit more time efficient, because you have that first pass and then you put your lawyers or your document reviewers on there. So that's kind of hampering the need to have a ton of lawyers or document reviewers on staff, or even need them resources, especially if a client doesn't prefer to just have everything reviewed by a person. So that's kind of calling down the need for ALSPs to have so much headcount, I was told. And at TransPerfect, he said it's great to have a lot of people on staff, but I asked them, are you seeing more of a need for people that are experts in this technology? And he said, we're seeing more need for that, because you need that technology to help the corporate legal department clients that you have to actually implement that technology. So he even said he's seeing more demand for the software and expert experience on that, not really the reviewers themselves.
So did I miss anything?
We're done the Victoria hour, I think, right now.
Yeah. Well, we knew that starting out, but I don't know what happened with my headphones there, but maybe I just blew out my little speaker I use for my podcasting. Nikki, we haven't heard from you much today. What did you want to talk about?
Well, the article that I thought sounded really interesting was from law.com, but I unfortunately have worked my way through my free subscription to them, so I can only read the headline and the little excerpt, but that was enough to get the gist of it for purposes of what I'm interested in. It was this idea that in Texas, there's I don't think it's a commission. It was let me see. Essentially in Texas, they're recommending that they continue with the judges like Texas Judicial Council. The judges like virtual court so much for certain types of appearances that they want to actually continue doing it post-COVID. And the Texas Judicial Council put forth a request to lawmakers to allow that to continue. And I just thought that that was super interesting because I think that if you had asked any of us in January, what is the likelihood that Texas is going to start recommending remote court appearances? Who here would have said anything above like 2%? Like, what's the likelihood that's going to happen? It's not a chance in hell, right? Like, I think we all would have said that. And yet here we are in September because of COVID, and the judges are finding that certain situations, maybe not necessarily jury trials or bench trials, but for regular court appearances, it's more efficient for them. They have more control over everything. They can, I'm guessing they may like the fact that they can cut counsel off sometimes, like literally cut them off and not hear from them anymore. So they're finding that it's, that they like it. And so you force them into the tech and they're actually finding it to be beneficial. And I think that's super exciting, but geek that I am.
Yeah, I think it's also consistent with something we talked about last week, which is this sort of a related vein about lawyers learning they love remote depositions. And maybe they don't love them necessarily, but that there are real advantages to doing depositions remotely. Not just that it cuts out travel, but as I think I mentioned this last week, as one person was telling me recently that when you're recording the witness on Zoom, you get they're staring at the camera and you see their eyes. If you're in a live deposition and you're recording that, then when you show them a document or something, they're looking down. You don't see their reaction. So one of the weird advantages of online depositions is just the witness has to look at the document on the screen, and so they're looking at the screen.
Interesting. I just think it's. Yeah. I just think it's exciting because lawyers are using tech.
I think it's, I mean, you still hear about, I guess, as you said, Nikki, it must depend on, for cases where you don't really get that much benefit from really being in person. Like there's a lot of trial, you'll hear trial lawyers, talk almost romantically about needing to, see them in the eyeball, look them in the eyeballs, and I got a sixth sense, and all of this sort of very sort of tactile. I have to be there in person, and I think I still hear quite a lot of that, and I think that's one of the reasons, all the emotional stuff that stops them from liking some of the remote. But then just for procedural hearings, where actually it doesn't really serve any purpose to be there. Actually, I can see why this would be hugely exciting in terms of speeding it up and not having everyone to go traveling in, and so from a time and cost perspective, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and I mean I have the same thoughts about it, except that then it gets really easy to just do really big types of cases and push them through, where not everybody, it's not in the best interest of everybody to do that. So I do have some concerns about kind of pressing forward without looking at whether low-income populations are harmed more, or if there's discrimination, which is some of the data coming out is showing that there's more disproportionate impact on Black defendants if the criminal matters are handled remotely. So, those are things that I think that we have to keep watching and make sure that we're accounting for and adjusting for. So I'm largely supportive of this movement and see a lot of benefits coming out, and the judges are seeing that too, which is great. But I kind of have that kind of cautionary approach to,
right.
let's at least continue to review and study and make sure we're paying attention to the data.
And I suppose, Molly, there's all the other stuff as well as about does it make it more accessible? Is it less intimidating? I guess there's all sorts of studies that need to be done along, aren't there? Like, I mean, I don't know if anybody, I guess there must be people that are sort of already looking into this. I haven't heard about any studies, but I guess there's got to be someone crunching the data and working out. Does it mean that, I don't know, there must be so many different points that you can look at in terms of how is it improving or making access to justice worse?
Well, I think so, like with Utah, what I thought was interesting, and I don't think we got to this story last week, with their online dispute resolution platform. I can't remember which organization did. I think it was the University of Arizona. It was an academic facility, did a kind of a deep dive into
Stacey Butler's group there.
Took a deep dive into studying the platform from a consumer perspective and found lots of flaws. And what I loved about that story, even though the headline was really sensational about all the weaknesses, is that Arizona identified the weaknesses, and Utah seems to be at least very quickly responding and adjusting and improving the technology. So that's what I like to see more of, so that these technologies and processes are being studied. I don't know that everybody's doing that. I'm hoping they're working in studies into what they're doing instead of, in 5 years we'll see how it's going. That's where you institutionalize bias, and it's really hard to walk that back.
Yeah, those are great points. Molly, did we cover everything you wanted to talk about? Was there anything else? You had listed some things, but I know we've kind of hit on a lot of the things you were interested in talking about.
Yeah, and one of mine was the death sentence by Zoom in Nigeria, and then another one a few weeks later in Singapore. Those are the ones that, not feeling like that's a really good case to be testing remote technologies. But the Nigerian authorities are saying that's the best way to increase access, and they've already had wide adoption of Twitter and other aspects of social media to keep the public in the loop and informed about court appearances and things like that. But I'm not really thinking that death sentences over Zoom is a good idea right now. And his lawyer is appealing because he objected to it, and they went ahead with the virtual sentencing anyway.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Are they going to do the death sentence virtually? Because in that case, maybe that's a step forward. if they're not going to sentence them personally, maybe there won't actually be a death sentence. Is what I'm trying to say. I mean, it just seems like if you're going to sentence someone to death, you ought to at least look them in the eye when you do it. Like, personally, that's a pretty drastic step, and it's taking the humanity out of it for sure.
Yeah.
So since we're on this topic, it just reminds me of a story I wrote today, which is not particularly tech related. But we were talking about looking them in the eye for the death sentence. I just was taken to Judge Smales saying, sentence boys younger than you to the gas chamber, didn't want to do it, felt I owed it to them, from Caddyshack. Because Bill Murray has received a cease and desist letter. I don't know if anybody saw this kicking around, but the Doobie Brothers attorney sent Bill Murray a cease and desist letter. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should seek it out, because it's hilarious. Like, that the lawyer did a masterful job of saying, you know what, I don't have to be serious in this. And so he writes this demand letter. It is high comedy. And yeah, but it struck me, since I had to write about it, I made all sorts of Caddyshack references. And that's what I thought of when somebody said you have to look them in the eye. But yeah, no, that not particularly tech, although, I mean, I guess it's not legal tech. It's tech to the extent it's an intellectual property violation. But yeah,
I'm going to definitely look that up.
Yeah, it's a fun one. A lot of the legal
That's a
writing
Good Friday
Twitter.
one.
Yeah, legal writing Twitter
Yeah.
went off on it yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. One other story I thought was kind of interesting this week was just this. Colin Lachance out of Canada launched this thing called the Legal Innovation Data Institute this week, which is kind of modeled on the Harvard Law School's Case Law Access Project or the Free Law Project of just sort of putting, taking court data and cleaning it up and putting it in a consistent format and then kind of making it available for bulk downloads and bulk use as a way of kind of, spurring innovation in delivery of legal information. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I don't know that I understand fully if it's just fully grant supported, or I don't know if I ever asked this question, or if they're trying to make money off of this, selling the data, but it's always good to see these kinds of projects that are really focused on making this kind of data as widely available and available for, it just helps drive innovation in these areas. Anything else anybody want to talk about this week? All right. Well, before my next, yeah.
I was going to say along those same lines, I almost submitted this as something to talk about, but I didn't. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, I'll put this in the comments, but they sent a letter. It's about PACER. They signed on to a letter to expand access to, get rid of the PACER paywall and expand access in terms of access to justice. And so it's just interesting to see that there are a lot of different areas of movement in that regard. Or attempts to move the bar maybe. But I just thought that was relevant. It's sort of relevant to that discussion, except on our side of the fence over in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think we talked last week about the fact that bill moved forward. Did move out of committee? I think in Congress that would eliminate the PACER fees. So that's something. And there was also kind of related this week. Something I wrote about was this. Another lawsuit between two legal tech companies, and this one relating to two companies that really focus on court docketing technology. This courtalert.com has sued, with a New York-based company, has sued American LegalNet, which is a California company, claiming that they have basically built their whole company by stealing the trade secrets of courtalert.com. But they seem particularly to be pissed off about the fact that American LegalNet hired one of their salespeople just this summer, and they claimed that they went in and did a forensic analysis of the salesperson's work computer, laptop, and found evidence that salesperson had been downloading all sorts of proprietary data before he left and sending it off to American LegalNet, and that in fact the CEO of American LegalNet had written the guy's resignation letter for him or helped him draft his resignation letter. So who knows what to make of that one. I mean, of course, American LegalNet says it's frivolous, and they haven't actually answered the case yet, but that'll be another interesting one to follow. It's got
a bit of remnants of the old Ross Thomson Reuters.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right, yeah. Which is another interesting one that's still moving forward, and another interesting one to follow. So.
Yeah.
These are ones where you want the popcorn emoji, like just sort of like
I love
those cases. You're like, this will be a good one to watch, right? Like, what's going on over there? And that just seems like the sort of no holds barred lawsuits. Like the people that are in it are getting mad, and they're saying stuff that instead of biting their tongues like their lawyers are probably advising them to do. So it's interesting to you just want to sort of sit back and watch, see what goes on.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well,
good stuff. All right. Well, we will be back here next week at 3 Eastern time. And until then, everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice weekend.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Have a good weekend.